This next video will begin round 3 and cycle through the Techno Angel's turn, and we'll get to see some combat. Okay. For upkeep, the Techno Angels will replenish their hand to 5 components. And as the first action, the red jack will move and decide that he does not like this component on this line segment. So he will invoke combat to change the component type on this line segment. And when he invokes combat this way, he is challenging the grid. And when challenging the grid, the red jack can make use of any power points or component cards for modification within combat, but the grid has neither of those. The grid has no power points or component cards. Okay, so to move into combat, combat uses the Electromagnate poker deck along with assorted random events that are shuffled in. Combat uses a variant of Texas Hold'em poker, which begins by placing 2 hole cards for each opponent. Because the random events exist in the combat deck, these component cards must be checked by each opponent to make sure that they do not hold any random events. Any random events that exist in the hole cards are taken and buried on the bottom of the deck, and a replacement card is drawn off the top. Now, for the purpose of this video, both hole card pairs will be face up for the audience's convenience. And fortunately, there are no random events in these hole cards. So we will begin with the first phase of Texas Hold'em poker by drawing what is known as the flop. The flop has 3 cards drawn out of a 5-card community sequence, which are used by the opponents to create the best poker hand at the end of the combat round. Okay. Now, after each draw phase, this one being the flop, any opponents with component cards may use them to modify any of the cards in this sequence. The grid cannot use component cards, so will pass. The Techno Angels, however, and its champion, the red jack, who invoked combat, will decide to use a C component and wager the C component in the wager square. And what this does is give the red jack a negative polarity token. Negative components yield negative polarity tokens. Positive components yield positive polarity tokens, which are red. And once the red jack has cashed in his C component, he gets a negative polarity component to place on any rank or suit. Any cards, rank or suit. And the rank is the number value for the cards. Placing a negative component on a rank will lower it by 1 increment. So the 5 of spades would become, the 6 of spades would become a 5 of spades. And that can be done on the higher rank cards. The jack would become a 10 of hearts. The king would become a queen of hearts. So the red jack decides that he wants to place his negative polarity component on a pip, decreasing the suit of spades by 1 increment. Now, this combat uses a hierarchy of suits, starting at the bottom with clubs, then higher is diamonds, then hearts, then spades. So to place a negative token on spades would decrease it to a 6 of hearts. If a positive polarity token is placed, the spade would overflow and go to the bottom of the hierarchy. So increasing a spade would turn it into a club. So the red jack has made his modification, and that concludes the first draw phase. The next draw phase is the turn, and has drawn a 7 of hearts. Now the red jack is in a good standing because with his component modification of the 6 of hearts, he now has a 5-card flush full of hearts with a king high. We have jack of hearts, 6 of hearts, king of hearts, 7 of hearts, and 2 of hearts. The grid, meanwhile, does not have anything. Okay, so the red jack, comfortable in his standing, will not make a component modification, and the grid cannot make a component modification. So the last draw phase is the river, which draws a 3 of diamonds and gives the grid a single pair. Okay. The red jack chooses not to use any component modifications, and the grid cannot, so we move to the showdown. At the showdown, both whole card pairs from each opponent would be turned up, but as they are already up, will determine who has the best hand. And with no further component modification, the red jack has the best hand of a 5-card flush of hearts with king high. So the red jack wins this round, and as such, when leaving combat, gains all winnings committed to the wager. So the red jack wins back his C component and goes into his component hand. The combat cards get buried on the bottom of the combat deck. And now outside of combat, the red jack, being the victor, can now replace the component that he targeted with any component from his hand. And he chooses to replace the A component with a D component. And the A component goes back into his hand. Okay. The red queen and red king still have to move. So the red queen moves over and places an A component and completes the right triangle circuit, and will tally power points for her faction. So 6 plus 7 is 13, plus 10 is 23, plus their reserve of 8 is 31 power points. The red queen will decide to purchase a stone circle at her location for 25 points, leaving the Techno Angels with 6 power points. Finally, the red king will move over and place a B component on this line segment. Okay, that concludes the Techno Angel's turn, and in the next video we'll finish round 3 with the Shadowmare's turn.